In this video, I'm going to be giving you my top 5 rundown of the highest impact pieces from NLP, so far as I'm concerned, and specifically with regard to the impact that they made on me early on when I first encountered NLP. So this is my low-hanging fruit from NLP. I've often said that NLP was game-changing for me, was life-changing, truly life-changing, and it really was. But a lot of the things that made the difference for me are not the things that people immediately think of when they think of NLP. And I've said this elsewhere. Although I have a reputation as a change work practitioner, coach, this kind of thing, an agent of change, and a lot of my foundation for that, where I started with that, was NLP. This doesn't mean that the classic NLP change techniques were the pieces that made the big difference for me. So I'm going to give you my top 5, and at the end I'm going to give an honorary mention for something that perhaps should be on the list. I don't know, it was huge for me, and it was actually one of the first things I really got into with NLP and really used, but it was perhaps not as life-changing or as immediate to deploy as some of these other things that I'm going to talk about here. So I'm going to go in reverse order from 5 down to 1. At number 5, we have modeling. Now, I'm not going to say much about this. I'm just going to point you to another video, because I did a video the other day of talking about how modeling was such a massive game changer for me. How the idea that people are collections of patterns. So if you see competencies in other people, whether that's competencies in what they do or in how they are being and how they are engaging, if you can kind of model that, if you can map that out and bring some of it into yourself, and this is the idea behind modeling, then you get a lot of that goodness. Now, I did a lot of this, I talked about it in the other video. It was hugely game-changing for me, hugely, and in a sense it perhaps ought to be number 1 on this list, but I'm putting it as number 5 because I did a video on it just recently. So check out that video if you want to know more. So number 4 is the principle, the map is not the territory. Now, this is one of the things that NLP got from Alfred Korzybski's general semantics. The map is not the territory. The menu is not the meal. The Tao that can be named is not the true Tao. Our ideas about a thing are not the thing itself. Now, this is huge. This is a massive game changer for me, and I'll explain why. I often used to call this the first transformative truth. The problem is, if I confuse my ideas about a thing for the thing itself, if I think my ideas are truths about the thing, then I can't change my ideas because they're attached to the thing. And then, then my ideas become wrong. I've either got right or wrong ideas about the thing. And I live in a black and white world, a binary world, right and wrong, this versus that. What I'm unable to do is look at things in a variety of different ways. So NLP recognizes that our ideas about things are not the things themselves. They are merely how we hold those things. Whatever is going on in the world, we have to make sense of it. And that sense that we have is a map, it's not the territory. So what this enables us to do is become less truth addicted. Instead of arguing all the time about what is or isn't so, and whether something is true or not, we recognize that none of our ideas are strictly true. Okay? If I hold a coffee cup out in front of me, which I normally have, whatever ideas I have in my head about the coffee cup, they can't be the coffee cup because they're out here. They're up here and the coffee cup's out there, right? So my ideas about the world are not the world. They're never true. So the only question is, how useful are those ideas? Are they helping me interact with the world in a way that's useful in creating the results that I want to create, or are they not? So NLP looks at utility over truth, the utility of our ideas over the truth of them, the utility of how we hold the world in our minds and in our hearts maybe, over how it actually is, i.e. we're interested in the map. The map is what we have to work with, not the territory. Now, of course, there are correlations between what's out there and a map. A good map, if I try and get round London with a map of Glasgow, that's not going to help me, right? So there's got to be a correlation. But I can get round London on the tube map, providing I'm using the London Underground network, but that doesn't actually correspond too closely with the truth in terms of, real geography and this kind of thing. But it's a useful map. So NLP advocates that we move from a place of being truth addicted, but is it true, isn't it true, to, okay, what's the most useful sense for me to make of this? What's the most useful sense in terms of creating my being with it, my engagement with it, in terms of creating the behaviors that I want to bring out, these sorts of things. So we can hold our sense making a lot more flexibly, and we can be at cause with our sense making or our map making instead of being at effect to it because we mistake it for the truth. All right. Now I've covered that super quickly, but it's the gift that keeps on giving. The more deeply you get this, the more adept you can become at managing your relationships with the world. Okay, so I got a lot of this from NLP. I got a lot of it from when I studied philosophy. And later on, I got a lot from the 3 principles. That really helped me deepen my understanding. So I mentioned the 3 principles here. I'm not going to say what that is. But again, if you're curious about the 3 principles and my take on the 3 principles, please do ask the question. Please do say, yes, I'd like to see a video on that. And I will make one. So just use the comments below. All right, so that's number 4. Number 4 is the map is not the territory. And it's having an appreciation for the utility of a way of making sense of something rather than the truth of it. Number 3 on the list is the idea of totes and feedback. Now, totes, this is an idea from cybernetics that NLP took from cybernetics. TOTE stands for test, operate, test, exit. I have another video that I did on this, so I'll link that video up that you can go and check out if you're interested in this idea. So a tote is reliant upon feedback. Test, operate, test, exit. It means that if there's something I want to achieve, I go, right, here's the thing I want to achieve. I know what it looks like. I look at my current circumstances. I go, is that like what I want? No, right? That's my test. So I need to pay attention to feedback. Then I perform an operation, whatever it is. I change something. I do something different. And it either brings me closer to or further from the thing that I want. Okay, so we make a constant adjustment. It comes from cybernetics. Cybernetics is from the Greek kybernetes or something like that, which means steersman. So if you think about steering a boat under a bridge, you're constantly course correcting and paying attention to feedback. So ultimately, providing you pay attention well and you have good use of the tiller, you're going to get under that bridge. You're going to steer the boat well. So if we run our lives like this, we want to pay attention to feedback. So one of the principles, one of the foundational presuppositions of NLP is there's no failure, only feedback. We constantly pay attention to feedback to make adjustments. This was a huge game changer for me because it had me become more alive to what was happening in the moment and had me become less attached to preconceived ideas about how things should and shouldn't be and more able to adjust and improvise and adapt. This was extremely useful for me, particularly in social interactions and these kind of things. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later on. One of the reasons that I got into NLP is because I had terrible social anxiety, okay? And I felt that I was not good in social situations and I was not good at handling other people and communicating with other people. And one of the reasons why is because I wasn't really connected with the reality of the situation. I didn't know what I wanted to create and I wasn't able to be adaptive. Okay, so that's number 3, totes and feedback. And all of this stuff I'm talking about right now also relates to points number 2 and number 1. So number 2 on the list is outcome focus. What I learned in NLP is the outcome frame versus the problem frame. This is a super simple idea. Instead of hanging out in the realm of problems, what's a problem? Why this is bad? Why that's terrible? Why this thing is stopping me doing this? Instead, you cut through all of that and you think, okay, so what do I want here? What do I want to create here? What needs to happen here for me to get the outcome that I want? Now, these days, I tend to think of this a little bit differently. I can think you can be a problematizer or a pathway finder, okay? Now, I'm not saying there are no problems in the world, and I'm not saying it's not useful sometimes to go, oh, here's a problem, but what you don't want to do is hang out in the problem. You don't want to be a victim to the problem. So as soon as you're in a problem, you're either looking for a solution or a pathway through, okay? And often in life, it's not necessarily about solving the problem. Sometimes it's pathways around the problem. So I don't want to end up being had and hanging out a lot in this idea that the world is just a bunch of problems. It's just a bunch of stuff that's getting on top of me and getting in my way and stopping me achieving what I want. Now later on, many years after doing NLP, I was coached by a guy called Steve Chandler who introduced me to Steve Chandler, to pronounce that more clearly, who introduced me to a distinction that he called the owner-victim distinction. It's the same kind of thing here. An owner owns their power, owns their choices. An owner is somebody who habitually sorts for where they can make differences in the world. A victim, as Steve would call it, or did used to call it, he's changed his terms now, is somebody who habitually sorts for where they cannot make a difference, i.e. all these problems that are in the way, everything that's blocking me, everything that's stopping me. So this is a change in a sorting pattern. You sort for where can I make a difference? Where can I make a difference? Where can I make a difference? What's the way around this? What's the way through? Where do I want to go next? Where do I want to move to? Right? What are my options? What are my possibilities? This is having an outcome frame or having ownership of your power. The problem frame or the victim frame is habitually sorting for where you can't make a difference. Oh, I can't do this because of this, but that's all right for so-and-so. They can do it because they've got this, this, and this. I just don't have this. Right? Now, this was a huge, huge, huge game changer for me. It was massive because I used to hang out in problems all the time. And sometimes I would end up panicking because I felt like I was out of control. I didn't even know I was doing it. We human beings are very poor witnesses to our own processes. So I was oppressing myself with my own thinking and I had no idea. So I applied this really early on. I'm going to tell you a quick story here. When I was very early on into NLP, I'd got my practitioner training under my belt. I say very early on. I've been learning NLP on my own for 5 years before I did my prac training. But I remember I ended up co-facilitating a course on time management, I think it was. Like I'd be the guy to talk about on that, particularly back then. And we were running it for a local council in Luton, in Bedfordshire. Now, my second daughter had just been born and we'd gone out. I didn't drive to this place that we were delivering the training. But halfway through the day, somebody came in and said, James, there's a phone call for you. Could you come out and take it? So I came out and I took this phone call. And it was my father-in-law phoning up saying my daughter, who was only a few days old, had been taken into hospital. And they suspected she might have meningitis. She might be very, very ill. Now, I felt a panic begin to arise in that moment. But because I've been doing so much intentional outcome framing, I recognized it and recognized I was about to get caught in a problem set because I was quite a long way from the hospital and I didn't have my car because my co-trainer had driven. Okay, so I was without transport. And instead of going, oh no, I don't have my car, what am I going to do? I was like, okay, so what needs to happen here? Okay, I need to get to Stevenage, which was like, I don't know, 20 miles away. Okay, I don't have a car. So what needs to happen? Well, you need to get a taxi. Okay, but I don't have any money. Okay, so what needs to happen here? I need to arrange for somebody to meet me at the other end and pay. Okay, because on this day I'd happen to have left my wallet as well. So I was walletless and carless and everything. Now, that was a moment I remember. It might seem trivial, it might seem small, but I know that before I was practicing with intention, and I talked about this in another video, the outcome frame, always moving to outcome, re-patterning and re-habituating my thoughts to be outcome focused, I would have got lost in and I would have gone immediately into panic. Thinking, oh my God, my daughter's sick, I can't get there, what am I going to do? Right, I'd have gone into a flap. That would have pulled me out of my higher mind and my creative functions that are able to come up with solutions. And again, I'm not giving this as an example of saying, look how brilliant my thinking was. It wasn't, it was simple. But just to illustrate to you how habitually going to problems and panicking about problems, and some people, and this is how I used to be, are what I would call problematizers. They sort for problems so habitually that even if there aren't really any, they're going to look for them and find them and create them, just so they can continue to live an existence of the world is oppressing me. I don't have power. All right, we're going a bit too far down a rabbit hole on this one, but it's a huge piece. So that was a major game changer for me. Again, it could have been number one, but it's number two on this list. Number one on this list, it could have been outcome framing, it could have been modeling, it could have been many things, but number one on this list is sensory acuity, paying attention, and not mind reading. Not mind reading. Now let me talk about this. In NLP, mind reading, generally, particularly at practitioner level, this kind of thing, is not some cool thing that you do that's going to impress people. It's not like, wow, I read this person's mind. Mind reading is the act of unconsciously believing that you know things about what's going on in other people's minds and the reasons behind things. Okay? And you don't. But you can think, you can come up with a hypothesis and go, they must be thinking this, they must have done this because of this. And you fall for it. Instead of saying the map is not the territory, you think this is really true, and you get caught up in a bunch of thoughts about it. People do this a lot. Now, this idea actually comes from general semantics again, Alfred Korzybski's general semantics. Alfred Korzybski, when he was looking at how people make sense of things, he talked about this idea of the chain of inferences. That we could see something out there in the world, like we might see an expression on somebody's face, and we make an inference about what that expression means. So we might see that somebody's sort of like a bit like this, and we make an inference that they're in a bad mood, and then we make a further inference that they're in a bad mood with us, and maybe we make a further inference that they never really liked us anyway, and we can't do anything right, and then we make a further inference. So this is why this is called the chain of inferences. It's more like a cascade of inferences. Now, of course, there's 1,001 reasons why somebody might have that facial expression. But we can tend to go down one cascade of inferences and think it's really true. No, it really is true that they don't like me. It really is true that Bob doesn't like me. You know, instead of going, hang on a second. Let's just stick with what we can see. Let's stick with the information, not the inferences. So if I see somebody and they're pulling a facial expression, I can be curious about that and go, I wonder what that could be about. It could be about this, but it could also be about this or this or this or this. So what happens is, instead of me going down a cascade of inferences that might have a lot of victim psychology in, might be making stuff up very, very personal and all of this, I can stay at the level of information and curiosity about what it might mean. Now, this is an incredibly useful thing if you are looking to become a dynamic communicator, but that's not the big difference that it made for me. The big difference that it made for me is it got me out of disappearing into personal trances about things that would victimize myself, upset myself, disturb myself, and create a lot of anxiety and insecurity. Right? I was getting caught up in stories that my mind was making up about things, failing to see they were stories, thinking they were facts, mistaking my thoughts for facts. The map is not the territory again. So I'd end up going down this cascade of inferences, but thinking how I see it is how it is. No, it really is true that. Really is terrible. So I was victimizing myself by going down these chains of inference through mind reading, claiming to know stuff that I had no knowledge of, but fooling myself into thinking that I did, and paranoid knowledge at that, right? And if I'm making myself sound like some kind of wreck, maybe I was. Maybe this is what it is why I got into all this stuff. So the reason I placed this as number one is because it was incredibly liberating. Once I saw this, and I'm always saying that people are very poor witnesses to their own processes. So one of the profound things, the gifts that really began with NLP, and it's a gift that keeps giving, is this idea of being a better witness to my own processes. And I encourage people, when I'm coaching people, I'm helping them become better witnesses to their processes as well. Because you start to see how you're making stuff up that is not serving you. It's like, oh my God, I'm making that up. That isn't really how it is. That's just how I'm thinking about it. What's every other way of looking at this? Every other way of experiencing this? Every other way of being with this that I've been shutting myself off from? Okay? So the immediate effect of seeing this and witnessing it, I could see the recipes of insecurity that I was running in my own mind. Before I was seeing the world through them, I was caught up in them. Now I was able to see them and go, oh, that's what I'm doing. That's how I'm creating my insecurity. Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stay at the level of information and really pay attention to what's going on and be curious about that. So much of my anxiety was replaced by curiosity. And of course, in terms of interacting with other human beings, when your social anxiety disappears and gets replaced with curiosity, genuine curiosity, and the fear's gone, boom, that is a serious game changer. So I have an NLP to thank for that. Now you'll note that in my top 5 list here, I have not mentioned anything like swish patterns or anchoring or any of the things that people often associate with NLP. In fact, I haven't mentioned any techniques at all. If I mention techniques in the title of this video, it is simply because NLP techniques is a ranking keyword. NLP principles, the ideas were the things that made the biggest differences for me. And they were not ideas that I merely thought, well, that's interesting, that's food for thought. They were ideas that I implemented with a fierce intentionality. I am bringing this stuff into my being. The idea of becoming an NLP practitioner for me was about me bringing that stuff, bringing and embodying that NLP stuff in a way that made a real difference. It wasn't merely collecting a bunch of information about NLP and understandings about how NLP works, but not living it. So I wanted to make sure I lived this stuff and didn't merely know it. But the stuff that I was living was principle-based stuff much of the time. Things like the map is not the territory, the cascade of inferences, these sorts of things, and looking at how they applied in my life and applying them immediately, not the prescribed techniques that often people think about with NLP. Okay, before I close this video, I want to give an honorary mention. I want to give an honorary mention to the Milton model, the NLP Milton model, because I mentioned that before I did my prac training, I was teaching myself five years of NLP. The stuff I did in that time was modeling. Mainly it was modeling, which I talked about before in that other video, and also the Milton model. I decided I was going to get really, really good with the Milton model, and I spent 5 years before I did my prac training working that up as a teacher of martial arts, as a performer of mentalism and close-up magic, and as a practitioner of manual therapy. So I was using a lot of Milton model language in order to get physiological shifts to occur along with the manual therapy to hands-on stuff that I was doing. Also to direct attention and these sorts of things. The reason I didn't include this on the list is because it was something that I developed across time, not something that had an immediate impact on me. Whereas everything else on this list, as soon as I connected to the understanding of it, it made an immediate difference to how I engage with the world. So that's why the Milton model is off this list. As much as I love it, as much as I think it's an awesome thing, that's why it's not on the top 5. Okay, so if you have something from NLP that's made a really, really massive difference to you, a principle, an idea, a technique, whatever it might be that was a huge game changer for you, I would love to hear about that in the comments below. If you have any questions about anything I've said in this video, please do ask in the comments below. This channel is about personal mastery. It's about you becoming more effective at making the differences that you want to make in your life, consistently making those differences, being adept at that. Well, you know, if you're not subscribed, the right thing to do here is to subscribe and to hit the notifications bell. And there's nothing else I need to say right now. So until we next connect, keep on creating awesome things.